Welcome to Outside is Magic, a podcast about the intersection of creativity and the outdoors. I'm your host, Christopher San Agustin. In this episode, I sit down with Gabriel Amadeus Tiller, an advocate, builder, designer, and one of the quiet forces shaping how we move through the outdoors. Gabe's work lives at the intersection of trail building, community organizing, and creative stewardship. He's the kind of person who doesn't just dream up better systems, but he actually builds them. We talk about the beauty of slow progress, the power of doing less better, and what it means to contribute something bigger than yourself. Gabriel's perspective is honest, grounded, and full of reminders that the outdoors isn't just a place to escape, but also a place that we all need to show up. Let's get into it. Yeah, thanks, Gabe, for jumping on this podcast. And I think I'm just going to jump in. And I was kind of wondering if you could talk about how you approach projects. It seems like you put together all your projects in a very unique way that's very much you, from your photography to the branding to the physical experience that you kind of curate at your events. And I was kind of wondering where that all comes from, where it started, if there is an origin story.
It's all storytelling, and I have a design background, a design degree. And I was practicing that before I dove into the outdoor recreation world. So I think it's all sort of the same, part of the same, different tools trying to communicate the same message, whether it's visually or whether it's visually with design, visually with photographs, or with words, or just with the trails itself, and how, someone following the trails or following the route will be challenged or see the same views, and you could sort of piece together a story in that way. And I think that's, I think it's really cool to combine them all. I'm lucky to have those skills in my back pocket to be able to use for this sort of work too.
Are you able to trace it back to your younger years? Is there a moment where you really discovered that you had creative expression?
Yeah, I mean, it's always really creative as a child. Parents were creative themselves and encouraged it in me and my brother. So was dabbling in all sorts of art type things as a kid, and didn't really didn't really think about it as a career until I was in, almost graduating from high school, and realized that graphic design could be a creative career. So went into it that way. But yeah, I was really shaped by just being really curious as a kid. And, I would do dabble in woodworking. My dad's friend was a sculpture professor, and he had a woodworking shop in his studio. So every time we visited, we'd go make swords or axes or whatever, kids love to make. And, I was like, oh, I don't know how shoes are made. So I'm going to take a shoe and try to recreate it out of pieces of paper, and try to just glue all these pieces of paper together in the same, way that shoes are constructed, to learn how shoes are constructed. Or so there's just all sorts of creative and curious ways that I was trying to figure out, what I like to do, what else, how things were made, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, curiosity. Yeah, it's interesting now, especially how they're just on their screens all day, while we kind of grew up in a time where you were really pushed to be creative and make things with your hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I spent so much. I was lucky to live in a pretty rural place. So I spent a lot of time outdoors. A lot of my creativity stuff was building things, like building forts. And then those got more complex as I got older. And yeah, I think, it's all that stuff. You can still do it, but yeah, there's just so many distractions these days as a kid. It's really hard to find those opportunities to actually just focus long enough to get creative like that.
Yeah, totally. You spent many years kind of bootstrapping projects and building things from ground up. Curious, what's the toughest lesson you had to learn through those experiences?
Just being okay with that, being okay with it. It's bootstrapped and not perfect, and probably not going to make very much money, and just being okay with that, sort of that insecurity or that imperfection, which is really hard for me. But the alternative is probably harder, just doing the same thing day in and day out, or something that doesn't inspire me, because I like to be challenged constantly, and that's what these sort of things have offered. Yeah, so it's been it's yeah, definitely challenging, like you pointed out. But I think it's been I have that debate with myself probably weekly, and just keep coming out on the side. I'd rather do what I want to do, even though if it's not super secure.
Yeah, 100%. Is there a lesson that stands out that you learned something very special from all these experiences?
Let's see, a lesson that stands out. I think maybe it's not a lesson that I've learned yet, but one that I keep learning is when you start something from nothing, you don't, you gradually learn more and more about it, and you don't really acknowledge when you become knowledgeable about that subject or about that thing, or even an expert about that subject. So I keep probably underselling myself in terms of my expertise. And and that's and I mean that like when I'm communicating to other people, but also just when I'm like, thinking, if is this a good idea? I don't know what I'm doing, and blah blah blah. It's just it's hard to remember to remind yourself that, oh, actually done this a bunch already. I've done this many times. I've been doing it for a while, and I probably have pretty good intuition, pretty good idea about what's good, what's bad, what's going to work. And I should, you know, have confidence around that and not second guess it.
Totally. Is there a particular project that really pushed you creatively and that you're super proud of? It could be more than one as well.
It's an interesting now that creativity, or at least the visual creativity, like photography and design, they're really useful for things like the Oregon Timber Trail and Orogenesis. But it's not, when I was doing it for work, I'd put so much more effort into the design elements. It's really ends up, the Orogenesis and Oregon Timber Trail are things that I'm most creative or most proud of, because they've been really successful. I think really inspirational. And it's partially because that creativity is now, like we're saying, it's sort of spread across all those different avenues. It's not just, in one aspect of it. So it is really thorough in like how someone experiences it, whether they're out on the trail or just, seeing it on the internet for the first time. And that's sort of, it's unique because, I spend way less time on the branding or visually creative elements. It's an afterthought for these projects, and I've gotten more praise about the branding and visual elements of these projects than I did when I was doing graphic design professionally, even though I've spent, a tenth of the time on the design that I did for so many clients in the past.
Yeah. And I think there's so much that goes into a project like the Oregon Timber Trail where you're connecting with different communities and you're bringing people together. So there's a lot of creativity beyond just the branding elements. There's creativity about how you're going to fundraise money or how you're going to host this event in the backcountry somewhere, and there's a big washout that you have to get around or something like that. So a lot of other ways to look at creativity too, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what's fun is I found design challenges to be very, the outcome would be different. You'd have a different logo or, at the end, but the process would be pretty similar, and it wasn't very challenging. It would be the same process. So having to think creatively about different challenges across this, big breadth of doing things is much more engaging for me. I think much more satisfying. And like the one thing that I really lacked before I was doing this was working with other people. I was freelancing, so it was pretty lonely. And that's, my favorite part about these projects is they're never going to be successful unless you interact with other people, unless you talk to the different organizations, the different individuals in these different regions that are doing these cool things, that are working with trail or maintaining trails, that are building new trails, finding old trails. Just the cool characters you're able to run across and work with has been just so neat to experience and get to know them better.
Yeah. Well, yeah, what's your like approach to, I guess, collaboration with these different communities that you're involved with now? I'm sure it varies from community to community, but yeah, what's your general approach?
Just meeting them where they're at. I don't want to. I'm just in a lot of areas. People in Pacific Northwest might know me, but down in California, no one knows who I am. So it's like I can't show up and be like, hey, I've got this great idea. You should, do this. And aren't you stoked on this? And it just doesn't work like that. You sort of have to show up and be like, hey, who are you? What are you up to? What's your projects that you're working on? And sort of understand what their motivations are and what their roadblocks are. And almost always there's, then they find out about the Orgenesis project and are like, oh, this little thing that we're working on in our backyard here outside of our small town is part of this much bigger thing. And they get excited about, being part of that larger vision. And almost always you find the overlap where one of their initiatives or one of their ideas is something that would help out the Orgenesis route as well. So that's really what I'm trying to do is, develop those relationships and figure out where the overlap is and just focus on those areas. And it might not be, some of the bigger challenges with Orgenesis are really remote and in the middle of nowhere. They're going to be a long-term project to try to find a solution for. And there's not that many of those, but there's just across the whole trail in less remote areas too. There's just a lot of ways we can improve the route. I think the smartest thing to do is just to start with the lowest hanging fruit. What are the things that we can work on with the regional orgs and where that overlap is? So focusing on those overlap areas is really rewarding because you get to work with these other folks. And then, down the road, once those projects, those easier projects are done, you'll have a much stronger relationship with these people, and maybe they'll be game to go deeper into these more remote areas and help, create new trails where there aren't any right now in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, totally. Has there been a time where your vision or your project butt heads with the community or the land managers and you had to problem solve around it? Is there any learnings around that?
Yeah, I mean, that's always going to be the case. A lot of people just lead with their fears. A lot of people just don't like change. And that's sort of part of, why I think leading with, figuring out what their incentives are, what their motivations are. Because, at first, like the Forest Service, is like, oh, that trail has got too much use or something. You can't use that, or there's going to be user conflicts. And, we can look at, like, oh, that's okay. That's a valid concern. How can we mitigate that? What kind of conflicts are there? Are there any conflicts? How can we better understand how this trail is being used? Or, maybe if you help us build this new trail, this is actually going to change the use patterns of the people recreating out there. And maybe it'll actually mean that now this high use or this high conflict area doesn't get as much traffic because people are only using that trail because it was the only connection or something. And now there's a better connection through this area that actually helps mitigate those pain points. So yeah, I think almost any area there's been those types of concerns, and there's not always an easy answer, but I think again, it's all about relationships and explaining like the why, not just this is what we want to do. I mean, like this is what we want to do because right now people have to ride their bike on a highway and it's dangerous. So that's why we want to put this trail next to the highway.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool to see everything that you're doing, how a lot of people are in more of a creative agency studio life. And what you're doing all can be applied to being in that studio environment, but you're on the ground kind of working with different communities and different land managers and using your skills in this very unique way that could also be applied in like a normal marketing creative setting. So it's kind of interesting to see you having this set of tool sets that can be applied in various different ways, but you're using it in this really cool, unique way.
Yeah, a lot of that, that stuff translates across industries really well, whether it's trails or design or, anything really, working with multiple stakeholders and trying to find some sort of common ground between them all, or get try to get everyone to some common ground. And, just like in a marketing setting, you have some goal or outcome that they're trying to achieve. And it's the same with trail development and advocacy as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. When it comes to trail building, do you feel like it's like creative?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the I don't know, I think that's the funnest part. You're creating an interactive, art experience. You're creating experiences for people to have. Ideally, you're creating memorable experiences that will transform people's lives in a positive, hopefully not negative way. So yeah, I think it's very, I think I have, and I think a lot of people have had really um, transformational experiences out in outdoor places, and I think it's really special to be able to help create those or curate those for folks. So whether you're trying to design a really long distance trail and like link together trails across multiple landscapes, or if you're just building 20 feet of trail, you're thinking about how someone's going to be passing through it, and what are their what trail builders call or go about trail design often with these anchor points. So like there's a cool rock feature over here we want to include, and there's a viewpoint over here, and then of course the trailhead is down here. So how can we link all those together? Same thing for longer distance routes. There's okay, we need a resupply in this town, but this trail is really sweet, and then there's only one river crossing over here, so we have to connect them all. So yeah, you're designing not doesn't matter the scale. You're designing how someone's going to be passing through the landscape. And same thing on a trail in front of you, it's like, oh, we'll leave that big rock there instead of moving it because it might be a fun little side jib, or we'll, you know, make the trail like this because it's gonna be good for the users in this way. And I think it's really similar across, regardless of the scale.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of thinking that trail building could be you're building the ultimate creative experience really because people are interacting with it, they're riding through it, walking through it, touching things, sitting down on things and like yeah, it's the most tangible creative experience ever, really.
Yeah, and it's different. I mean, anyone who does it is going to have a different experience, a slightly different experience, and I think that's neat. I love hearing people's takes. They're like, "Did you see that thing was so cool?" And I'm like, I didn't even know that was there. Like because it is the process of discovery when people are out on these things. It's maybe it's not all new to you. Maybe you've been on parts of it before, but it's when you do it all at once, it's definitely all new to you. You have a brand new experience.
Yeah. I'm wondering in the future with AI, like we can come to a point where you're on the Origin trail and you just have your headphones in and you kind of walking or riding through this augmented reality where you're learning about the trees and the Native Americans that used to live there and all of that could be really interesting. Maybe one day we'll get there.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of not that far fetched. I've got an app
Yeah.
on my phone where I can just point it at a plant and it'll tell me what it is. I've got an app on my phone that I can pull it up and it'll tell me whose native land I'm currently standing on. So yeah, it's already in the pocket, most of it,
Yeah.
which is super cool. I mean, I think that's part of the fascinating things, especially about longer routes, is you get all these other layers on top of them, like history layers, just cultural layers if you're going into towns or interacting with other humans. So there's just all these different ways you can learn about the place, whether it's natural, ecological, cultural, etc. It can make the experience just more and more rich.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm hoping that as the world gets more digital that people will rebel and really go towards the outdoors to have real life experiences again. Maybe we'll come in this full circle of people going digital and then going back into nature to kind of, reconnect.
But yeah, I think it's happening already. It's 100%. It's yeah, people I think are putting words to it, but even the people that aren't putting words to it are sensing it. There's now anytime we open up our phone, you're like, is that a photograph or is that an AI image? And it just creates this. It creates all of a sudden this realization, or maybe it's not even a realization, but this thought that it's nothing on the phone or is real really. It could be fake, so it's just hard to know what's real and what's not, but there's something very tangible about real life in-person events or just real life if you're out in nature by yourself. And we're like the ultimate social creature. So that's why the phones are so addictive, is because they provide all these instantaneous connections with, thousands, if not millions of people. So it's like just, cranking on that part of our brains that makes us human, that social part of our brains. But at some point our brains realize it's not actually real social interaction, so we crave that elsewhere. And I really think there is going to be a movement, and I'm banking on it, towards in-person events, and we've all sort of forgotten how to do that, after COVID. But I think it's coming back. I think people are getting more and more interested in being part of a community and like creating things together. I've seen that, especially with like the trail maintenance events, the stewardship work. People really find a lot of value in that, like creating something with a group of people they don't know and then being proud of it at the end of the day is really powerful.
What's the future of trail building, and kind of what needs to change to make it, I guess, more sustainable and just more open to everyone else?
Yeah, I just started reading a book that called Sacred Economics, and it's really just reading a chapter this morning about property and how private property came to be. We still think of air as not being something you can own, and water is sort of maybe in the middle ground a bit, because you can definitely buy water and there's water rights. And but private property like land is been something that people have drawn lines on and owned for quite a while now. I think it was the Romans maybe that started that. But the premise of this chapter is basically like that's just not that shouldn't be the case, because we it should be all of the earth, all the land, all the water, all the air. These are things that humans didn't create, so we can't claim ownership over them. They existed here before us. So I think this is a long-winded way of answering the question. I think that uh, you know, trail building now has so much red tape and so many different opinions about what it should look like, how it should be. And the process is just really broken. It ends up all that red tape and all the opinions and that really long, lengthy process just makes it really expensive and long. And a lot of times, these are people that want to make these things happen are volunteers, and they just get burned out. You can't ask a volunteer to raise a ton of money and take 10 years to do it just because they care, and the people are literally doing that, every day out there right now to build trails. So I just don't think that's sustainable. But it sort of comes back to that premise. The reason all of that exists is because we drew all these boundaries on the land and said this land is private, this land is public land. But even though it's public land, there's all these rules around it. The government has created all this structure around it that says what you can and cannot do. And hopefully, I think I'd like to see that change. I think the concept of land ownership is really ill placed. And this is probably very far fetched, but that's I think what ultimately the direction we're gonna have to go as a society. And this is much bigger than trails, of course. But if we can get to a place where we all take ownership over all of the parts of the earth that have existed without us creating them, then I think we'll all be a lot richer in the end.
Yeah, I agree. This is kind of like a semi-unrelated question, but what is your thoughts about? I think there's a lot of discussion about like the outdoor industry responsibility with land and nature, but what do you think about like professional athletes? Because like when I think about the events that you put on and the events that other trail associations put on, you don't really ever see like professional athletes at these events, and these are like the folks making a living off of running trails, riding trails, etc.
Yeah, I think, if it was down up to the athletes, that might not be the case, but oftentimes athletes are, they are got to do what their sponsors or bosses tell them to do. And that's usually events that have a lot of people there that have a lot of eyes on them, which makes sense. The athletes are sponsored because they want to sell more products. And that's how you get eyes on products or eyes on your brand. So I think that's a really short sighted way or not very deep way of thinking about growing your brand or your customer base. Like these, we're out building, and I don't mean just we, but any trail organization is out, literally building the infrastructure that sells these products. Like people aren't gonna buy a new bike if they don't have a trail to ride on. And it doesn't matter how sexy the athlete looks on TV. It doesn't matter, that someone's not going to buy a bike just to look at it. I shouldn't say that. People do that all the time. But for the most part, people, want to actually or need infrastructure to actually go use these things, use these products. And I think there's a big disconnect especially in the outdoor industry. In a lot of industries, it's similar, but some industries are a little bit more mature in that regard. So I think the outdoor industry should, yes, encourage athletes to get more involved, to like sort of herald the trail organizations more and the work they're doing. And some brands are getting a lot better at it. But even more than that, like, the outdoor industry is bigger than mining. It's bigger than pharmaceuticals in the US. Like it's a massive industry, and we have next to no political power. But when it comes to like the NRA is a special interest group, just like, the outdoor industry is, but they have this massive political influence because they see the value in paying lobbyists to go, bribe politicians to get what they want done. And, I don't like the game that all that is, but that's how stuff happens in this country. And that's what the outdoor industry needs to do if they want to level up and actually make things happen and sell more products in this country. They need to step into the politics game, and they need to really put their weight behind the people and organizations that are creating the infrastructure that sells their products.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What's the biggest mistake that you've made on your journey as a creative, as a person that builds trails and builds communities?
Oh, man, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
I don't know if
I'm sure there's been many.
Yeah, I don't know. There's lots of mistakes along the way. It's hard to put a finger on the biggest one. I don't know if it's a mistake, but something I've been toying with in my head recently is, like we were talking about earlier, I like to be challenged and try new things, but I've been wondering if I don't, do that too often, and I shouldn't stick with things longer to actually see them be as successful as they could be. So yeah, I don't know if that's true or not, because like, my natural brain does just want to jump from one thing to the next, not like constantly, but I don't develop a skill or knowledge about something until I am, you know, PhD level. I like just get my bachelor's degree and call it good and move on to something else. So, and I'm wondering if I should try sticking with things longer to see what would happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I was reading one of your interviews yesterday and you said do less better. Was that the
Yeah.
saying you said? Yeah.
Yeah. That's I'm making that was a recent goal, and I think I'm making some strides towards that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we can all relate to that one for sure.
Especially
Something
in today's society, like we're just, told we need to consume media, produce media, for our friends and followers and all this stuff. And, that used to meant just like pulling your phone out, taking a photo of your food and then hitting upload, and that was enough. And now you need to, write a script and record a video and edit the video. And, that just is just a crazy amount of work for some, for all of us on the internet. So I think, yeah, our lives, all these digital tools are supposed to make our lives easier, and they've actually just added more busyness to it all. So I think it's a good goal for a lot of people probably to do less more, because we're all sort of in this culture that says the opposite, that we need to consume and just consume more, do more. We're not successful until we're doing more than all other people around us.
Yeah. I have a friend and who I really look up to who had some learnings over the past few years, and he's got this new thing he's focusing on is do nothing. Because he spent so many years working on projects and creative things on the side that he's just focused on trying to do nothing and be more. I'm kind of like, it kind of irritates me a little bit because, I wish you were still doing that thing that I loved that you did. But at the same time, I have to respect that now the new challenge, the new creative project is to do nothing. Yeah, I mean, granted, he still has a family and a job and things, but
Mhm.
I was like, oh, that's interesting.
I was just gonna say, I realized my to-do list is just always there. I just never check off everything on the to-do list. I just move it to tomorrow. So I'm not successful at this yet, but I've tried to get down to doing one thing a day. And that doesn't mean just like check my email. Although sometimes if I let it go long enough, that's plenty to do in one day. But it's like I'll try to make to-do items that are complex, that have multiple steps. Instead of deluding myself that I can accomplish, these dozen complex things today. And it's just a nice way of framing it, being like, okay, I can focus. It's just one thing. It's got different pieces to it, but I can wrap my brain around one thing today and just think about that today.
Yeah. Yeah, I always ask people how they organize all their projects, and I feel everyone struggles with the same thing where they have 50 different things that they need to do, and then you put it on a big list and then it becomes overwhelming. You end up doing nothing. So if you just tell yourself, hey, if you can do this one thing or these three things today, that's all you need to do.
Yeah.
Everything else is a bonus.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally. And you feel more productive and successful at the end of the day if instead of one thing you got two done. Whereas, last week I had a half a dozen things on my list and I only got two done, so I was a failure.
Yeah, we can all relate to that. And my one thing today is this podcast. So thank you for helping me check that off. I can feel good the rest of the day. So I think we're gonna wind down a little bit. I guess looking back, the past decade or so of you doing what you do, is there a lesson or something or some kind of advice that you wish you had, say 10 years ago, that you now know?
Yeah, and someone did say it at some point about 10 years ago, probably. And I didn't believe them at the time. They're like, this is a career. You can do this full time, and I am now. And it totally, I'm not the only one. There's a whole industry of trail builders, trail professionals, people in the trail world, and that's just trails. There's a whole outdoor recreation world as well. So I think the advice is like I was really unhappy doing graphic design. It was just not fulfilling at all. And I was like, well, I find a lot of value and I have my whole life in outdoor experiences, whether it's backpacking or mountain biking or camping just out of my car. They're really fun and I think they bring a lot of value to my life. And, why can't I be doing something that helps other people have those experiences? So that's what, I started a guiding business where I was doing like multi-day bike camping trips that were supported because that seemed like the obvious way to get more people into these outdoor experiences. And it's one way. That wasn't really for me either, but that's when I got my foot in the door with outdoor recreation, tourism development, and really opened my eyes, being like, oh yeah, there is something here. There is totally a way that you can create these experiences and make a career out of it. And it was completely invisible up until that point to me. So I think, if you've got to have some sort of grumbling that something isn't right, you're just not satisfied, or you've had that for a while and you actually have an inkling of what you'd rather do instead, I would say just, research it, dig into it, whatever it is, like just start doing it and you'll meet people really quickly. You'll learn things really quickly. It's 10 years seems like a long time, and that's roughly how long I've been doing this, but it's flown by. I can't, like I was saying at the beginning of this, it's been 10 years, so I guess I must know quite a bit about it now, but it certainly doesn't seem like it. It still seems like I've just started doing this and I'm still just, breaking the ice and figuring it out. But it probably doesn't seem like people looking from the outside at what I'm doing. So, just apply that yourself. You don't have to be an expert, but just start doing the thing and figuring it out. And where you're going to end up in 5 or 10 years might not be that at all, but it'll be an educational process. You'll grow a lot as a human. And yeah, it's been, yeah, the last 10 or so years that I've been, making this big shift in my life has definitely been the most rewarding part of my adult life by a long shot.
If you could look ahead 5, 10 years, what would you have liked to accomplish with your organizations?
It's hard to say. I would love. I don't want to be. I don't want to like. I'm good at a lot of different aspects of it. Of the I love doing the mapping pieces of it, of the trails. I like the trail building. I like the communicating, the visually stuff, and I'm decent at a lot of that stuff. But it also puts me in this spot where I'm like sort of locked to this role. It's really hard to transition out of and be like, okay, now you're gonna do this aspect of it, and I want you to do this aspect of it. Like, yeah, that sort of secession piece of it is hard for me because I don't know that I want to continue doing like with the timber trail. I stepped away from the timber trail after 5 years, and it was the most satisfying and rewarding thing I'd ever done. But I was definitely getting really burned out, not making enough money, and it was just not sustainable. So I was like, okay, I need to try doing something different. But I felt like we were in a good enough place where it wasn't just gonna disappear if I walked away. And I guess that's what I'm hoping I can get better at and accomplish in 5 or 10 years is things that I invest a lot in. Like I can step away, hand off the torch, and then see them continue to thrive without me being involved in them. And I think that's the real sign of success.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you're leaving a legacy and allowing people to take ownership of it and carry it on.
That's the key. Like how to let people take ownership or convince them they can take ownership over something that you've created is hard. Well, it's hard for me, but it's probably even more hard for someone else. In the nonprofit world, they call it founders syndrome, where the founder of an organization doesn't leave the organization ever to the organization's detriment in some cases. So yeah, I think it's a challenge for everyone involved, but yeah, I think it's a really essential step of growth for a person or an organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Is there I know we talked about your mantra earlier. Um, do you have something else that you would like to share before we go? Words of wisdom.
Let's
I know, sorry, that's a hard one to put you on the spot.
Well, I'm just stoked. We've been working on the Orogenesis project since we launched the Timber Trail in 2017. But then about 3 years ago, I started doing it as a job and doing it full time. And so I've been putting a lot of work into it. There's tons of scouts all up and down the West Coast. They've been scouting sections of it, but we haven't actually published any pieces of it publicly so people can go ride it, because we've been trying to figure out what the best route is, how to connect all the existing trails in the best way. And now we're finally to that point. So I'm really excited to be there and get people out and get some feedback. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to that, and seeing people actually, this is being able to pick the fruit of the tree planting and growing. I'm really excited to see that. So yeah, I guess if you're a bike packer or just a mountain biker, go enjoy these things. Get out there. I think they're really cool. Close to some really beautiful places. I know I've had my eyes open to so many amazing landscapes and trails in Oregon, Washington, California, and Nevada the past few years. Yeah, just more than anything, really excited to share that with the world.
Cool. Thanks, Gabe. Yeah, I guess that's a wrap, and I'll, obviously share everything that you worked on in the description or whatever that ends up looking. I have no idea. But yeah, thanks again for coming on.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks for having me and making me think a little harder here. Not the usual questions of, tell me more about the trail, how long is it, etc. Yep.
And that's our show for today. If you like this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend. It really helps out. If you have any questions about creativity, process, or anything in between, please drop a comment. I'll get back to you as soon as I can, and I'd love to hear from you. You can follow along at Broken to Coastal on Instagram and YouTube. And please subscribe to my newsletter. It's a weekly dose of inspiration at the intersection of design and the outdoors. Thanks for being here. Cheers.